One thing I love about cowboy songs and cowboy poetry is the serendipity of it all. Um, Let me tell you a little story about that. I was going to the Wyoming Cowboy Poetry Gathering up in Riverton, Wyoming. This must have been 20 years ago. And my daddy used to run a cattle truck line out of Greeley, Colorado. He had 55 head of cattle trucks, and he ran them all over the West. We hauled cattle for everybody. And he always told me that once you cross that Wyoming line, you drive on the top half of your tank. He said, because sooner or later, he said, up in Wyoming, you're going to need that other half a tank to get you out of a jam or bad weather or whatever. So I always kept that in mind. So I was on my way to Riverton, Wyoming, and from our little place up here northwest of Fort Collins, you take the Laramie Road up to Laramie, and then you take I-80 over to Rawlins, and then you go up 287. And that'll eventually wind you up in Casper if you go that far. But if you turn left at a little place called Muddy Gap, you go through Jeff City and the radium fields, and you can go straight on over to Lander. You can take this cool little cutoff, that beautiful little thing that goes to Riverton, Wyoming. And so I took a left at Muddy Gap there, and I looked down, and sure enough, I was about half a tank of gas. And there's a gas station right there at Muddy Gap, and it's just an old Wyoming gas station. It ain't nothing but a trailer house and two pumps out front and an outhouse. Well, I needed to go to the bathroom too, so I pulled in there and filled up. And I went into the outhouse to do my business, and in true Wyoming fashion, just as soon as you get set down on the seat, you can see underneath the toilet paper roll, and the first thing you see is watch for rattlesnakes under the seat. And the next thing I saw was this poem that somebody'd written on the outhouse wall, and it was filthy. It was so bad I couldn't even do it at a men's ride. But there was a good idea in that poem. And so I wrote it down. I took this poem, and then I rewrote it so I could do it in public, in front of men and women. And the poem's called The Two Things in Life That I Really Love. There's two things in life that I really love. That's women and horses. That I'm sure of. So when I die, please tan my hide and tool me into a saddle so fine, and give me to a gal that likes to ride, so in the hereafter I may rest between the two things that I love best. Well, I did that poem. I wrote that poem, and I started doing it around at several things, and I started looking around to see if anybody else had written that. I'm not kidding myself. I think that idea has probably been around since guys have first been riding horses. But I wrote it down and wrote it in a way that people could understand it. And I started looking around, and there wasn't another poem out there like that, not that I could find. So I copyrighted the poem, and I did it for about 10 years, here and there at gatherings and, trail rides and that kind of thing. And 10 years later, Garth Brooks calls me up. He says, I really like that poem you wrote, and I want to make a song out of it. Well, you don't say no to Garth Brooks, So I said, sure, go ahead. So he wrote this poem called The Cowgirl's Saddle. And he puts that poem on an album called The Lost Sessions album. And it's a good song. He wrote a good song. Garth Brooks is good, and he wrote this wonderful song, and got a real Western swingy kind of beat to it, you know, and so sounded good. He sent me a check for more money than I had ever made at one time in my life. And so that's all good, you know, good old Garth Brooks. So fast forward another 10 years, and the Garth Brooks organization called me up. And he said, you know that song that Garth wrote from one of your poems? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, he wants to put it on his Best of Garth Brooks 10 CD collection. Do you mind if he does that? I said, no, I don't mind a bit. And so he put it on this Best of Garth Brooks, this 10 CD collection he's got, and sent me another check for even more money than I'd made the first time, more money than I'd ever made at one time in my life. And it was all because I had to take a crap at Muddy Gap.